Hello everybody, Adam Lusek here, and in today's video I wanted to provide a follow-up and little deep dive exploration for my PulseRead project. Specifically, I've gotten some questions and had some discussions around the different model selection for actually running the different analyses within the project, why I chose certain models, and whether the output might differ based on what model you choose. And so because I started getting some of those discussions and questions, I decided, why don't I put together some of the models that I currently have access to and compare and contrast the differences between their outputs. Quick refresher as to what we're actually analyzing within this program. It is first going to extract the comments from a social media post and then run it through 4 different analyses. The first one being this discussion theme analysis, where it'll pull the current discussion themes among the comments. It'll then run through a commonality analysis, where it'll attempt to group together comments by the different discussions going on, followed by an overall analysis, where it'll give an overall reaction, things about the prior different analyses, and then recommendations for what to do based on those. And then finally, there is a sentiment analysis, which isn't on this lovely board, but we'll get into that later. So the actual 6 models that I ran this analysis through are as such. I did GPT-4 Turbo and GPT 3.5 Turbo coming from OpenAI, Gemini Pro and Gemini Ultra coming from Google, Mistral-Medium coming from the Mistral team, and then Llama2, the 7 billion parameter small model from Meta. And I thought this would give a generally good holistic overview of different sizes of models and their performance in comparison when run through the exact same prompt given the exact same data to then see what happens next. So let's start here with the discussion themes and compare what the output was given those 6 models. And the first thing that I noticed right off the bat is that pretty much every single model here gave me 10 responses or 10 different discussion themes. In my prompt, I didn't specify to give me 10. I just said list all of them, but there seems to be some sort of direction behind the scenes to enjoy lists of 10 or something like that. But to go quickly through all the outputs that I got here, GPT-4 Turbo did a pretty good job and was very in line with what I was looking for by sort of listing out and bolding the main topics and then giving a more detailed explanation as to what these things we're talking about. So for example, like the first one here, innovation driven by frustration and necessity is one of the themes, and then its reasoning behind that is comments suggest that innovation often stems from frustration with the status quo rather than pure necessity, indicating a need to address and understand underlying frustrations in teams or processes. And it does a pretty good job of doing this for pretty much all 10 of these that it extracted. What didn't quite do exactly as good of a job, I would say, is 3.5 Turbo and Gemini Pro, if we move on to these 2 other models here. They did get a lot of the same overarching ideas and themes, but they didn't really go the extra mile to provide any of the different explanations or reasoning behind why or how that they extracted these. Although we're seeing a lot of the same sort of ideas start to pop up. Things like frustration as a driver of innovation, similar here as those number ones. Things like diversity, and diversity I know is somewhere in here. Yeah, number 4 for Turbo. But while they did get a lot of good themes, and this is perfectly usable as well, it didn't necessarily provide that extra reasoning as to why. What did was Gemini Ultra, and Gemini Ultra is very similar, I feel, in output to GPT-4 Turbo in this case, where it was able to sort of go through, do the similar bolding of the actual themes, and then provide a decent explanation of why. So to just highlight an example from Gemini Ultra, they say that one of the discussion themes is the motivators of innovation, a little bit different from things like necessity and frustration as drivers of innovation, or frustration, or innovation driven by frustration and necessity. But then within the actual description here, it says people debate between frustration and necessity as innovation sparks. Many users argue that frustration with current states pushes forward better solutions. So it's getting to a lot of the similar stuff, but also providing that nice extra mile that we saw in GPT-4 Turbo, but not necessarily in 3.5 and Gemini Pro. Going on to the other open source models that we've got here, we have Mistral-Medium, and well, actually, I don't think Mistral-Medium is open source, but their smaller ones are. And Mistral-Medium, I think, is a bit of a happy medium, no pun intended, between sort of the Gemini Ultras and the GPT-4 Turbos, and then 3.5 Turbo and Pro, in that it does give some of these overarching themes with a little less, but some reasoning and some explanation as to where it got that from. It's things like importance of clear goals and autonomy here, and then its reasoning being comments suggest that giving workers or teams clear goals and autonomy to figure out how to achieve them can lead to new insights and innovation. So it is pulling directly from the comments to do its reasoning, but just a little bit more concisely than Ultra and GPT-4 Turbo. Llama2 also put together something similar to what we saw with Gemini Pro and 3.5 Turbo, with not too big or not too small, actually, well, both, not too big or too small of an explanation, but still a solid one-liner of these themes. One of the things that I also saw with Llama2 is that it did like to add a lot more fluff on the edges, not just provide me with the list that I was specifically looking for. But it did get to some things like strong and supportive leadership, diverse team, innovative mindset, desire to improve, things like that. But it did also, ask me follow-up questions when I was pinging it, which wasn't exactly what I was looking for, but still it was able to pull some pretty decent one-liners here from the actual themes. In terms of how I feel about these different outputs and my different rankings of them, I put that over here on the side. My personal ranking is I really liked GPT-4 Turbo and Gemini Ultra with their pretty robust themes that they actually were able to extract, as well as the really decent explanations that these two were able to give here and provide that extra context. Then I liked Mistral-Medium and Llama2, pretty much because they were sort of that happy medium of giving the more complex and nuanced themed with a little bit of that explanation. And then Llama2 sort of combined that into one full line rather than summarizing it into the small ones, which is where GPT 3.5 Turbo and Gemini Pro pretty much fell for me right at the end. I would say these two are almost one-to-one comparable in what they did. And while this still is decent output and in line with some of the other things that we're seeing, it isn't necessarily putting together the extra information that could be useful there. Moving on then to the commonality analysis, this is where we started to see a little bit of actually these models having a bit of difficulty following the directions that I was asking for. So I wanted basically for them to look at the themes, look at the comments, and then group them together under the themes of what they're talking about. And so if we look here at GPT-4 Turbo, it actually did a pretty decent job. It identified different commonalities with examples for context, things like leadership's role in fostering innovation, with sort of a subcategory and then an example directly from the comments of quotations here. It did that for 5 different categories here. So not everything is hard-coded, I suppose, to give you a list of 10, but I really enjoyed these. You can also tell that it was doing a little bit more of that nuanced understanding by not just giving me 1 with 5 and then 2 with 5, but this first example has, 4 decent examples. The second theme has 3, the third and the fourth differ in those. So it is going through and grouping those pretty well. It's also, I think, successfully hitting with things like creativity, empowerment and freedom, necessities and problems. A little bit of a different approach was taken by GPT 3.5 Turbo. It pretty much said instances where 2 or more comments state the same thing, and then decided to try and group them together. So it was actually able to pull from the index that I had with the comment and label them as such. here, but it didn't give me any sort of reasoning. It didn't give me any sort of theme. It just put together comments, and it only stuck to 2 comments a pop that gave me sort of similar discussions. And while it might sort of be getting at something, I think it missed the mark a little bit. You can see this especially when it gets to the comments down here that don't have as much actual meat on them, as much words. Things like good leadership and culture might be similar, but things like necessity, desperation, yeah, that's not too bad. But like all of them versus the right CIO, I don't think are super common or super have much in common, these comments. But did an okay job at grouping. It didn't catch that I wanted more, like I wanted full groupings like GPT-4 Turbo was giving with these, pretty decent groupings here. But at least gave me sort of the comment and similar comments to them. Things like Gemini Pro completely missed the mark. It basically gave me what I was looking for up here with the discussion themes. But it provided another list of 10 of these different themes. And then instead of actually giving me the examples, it just says like multiple comments highlight the necessity of frustration rather than the necessity alone, yada, yada. So didn't really give me exactly what I was looking for in that I wanted it to actually group together the examples and group together the comments. This is more, I would say, better as a theme analysis here. But what did actually do that is Gemini's older brother, Gemini Ultra, which did successfully highlight multiple themes and then give me multiple examples from those comments. And what I really liked here is that it didn't actually give me the full comment itself. It took excerpts from the specific comments, labeled which comment it took it from, and then put them here. A little bit of prompt tuning could probably be done to actually get it to just fully group out all of them, because it looks like it started following a like 3 example. Well, in this case it's 2, but all these top ones give me just 3 examples of where this is being discussed. And I do like, however, this note at the bottom that a few individual comments focused on other aspects, but the themes above represent major discussion points where several commenters share similar views. So Gemini Ultra really hit it on the head pretty well with this one, giving me the different excerpts and the different themes here. Moving on to Mistral-Medium. Mistral-Medium also did a very decent job as well. Similar to sort of Ultra and GPT-4 Turbo, it was able to give me where 2 or more comments discuss the same topic or issue, and gives things like the role of necessity or problems in driving innovation, and will list out some good stuff. It also has that disclaimer note, several comments that discuss other factors, and it also even tells me what those other factors might be, which I really liked and why I didn't list those. But it did put together and effectively group really well these comments here in a very straightforward and clear way. Llama2 did not really. It looks like there was some behind the scenes stuff going to try and guide it in the right direction, but still it gave me similar to what I got from Gemini Pro, pretty much a glorified theme analysis, which is more of what I was looking for above that it gave me this. As for my personal rankings in terms of how well the models actually followed the instructions and prompts, and also given the quality of the output, this is how I sort of put these 6 in line. I had Mistral-Medium actually coming up top right here because it pretty much followed exactly what I wanted. It grouped together very effectively the comments under sort of these main overarching discussion themes that it generated, and did it all really cleanly and neatly here with a good disclaimer, listing out also some of the other stuff that was discussed but weren't necessarily put together, but weren't necessarily over discussed by multiple people. Gemini Ultra and GPT-4 Turbo sort of flip-flop, I feel, between 2nd and 3rd place. They did a decent job of giving me the themes and then grouping together the comments here. I really liked Gemini Ultra's excerpts from the comments, which is why I ended up actually ranking it a little bit above GPT-4 Turbo, but I would say both are pretty comparable. I do also like the note here about the different individual comments, but it didn't do sort of what Mistral did of actually saying what those other themes might be. 3.5 Turbo, Gemini Pro, and Llama2 all sort of didn't really hit the mark. 3.5 Turbo, however, did actually give me examples of the specific comments and try and list them all together with decent accuracy. But then Gemini Pro and Llama2 pretty much gave me a glorified themes analysis again without actually doing that grouping that I was looking for. The third analysis, the overall analysis, was a bit of a challenge for the models, actually. I wanted to see sort of how well they could do sort of a full report given these comments. So they were pretty much instructed to do 4 main things: provide like an overall reaction, a little bit on the key themes and insights, and taking those, how can a company potentially recommend things for future posts given the reactions from the comments, and then conclude it all nicely and put this all into a very brief yet useful report that something like someone working in marketing would be able to present to, leadership or something like that. So let's take a look at what we actually got out. GPT-4 Turbo was able to provide this analysis and report pretty damn well, I would say. It gave a good overall reaction. However, I do think it used some flowery language. Things like comments on the social media post reveal a rich tapestry of perspectives on what fuels innovation within an organization. The discussion threads weave through various themes, yada, yada, yada. So it did give a little bit of adjective heavy introduction here with its overall reaction and summarization, but it was able to very clearly segment out a lot of these things. Things like consensus emerges around, importance of supportive leadership, creative freedom, conducive environments for innovation, rather than focusing on necessity or technological advancements. It then gave me some clear insights into the key themes, things like leadership and environment, stuff like that, with some pretty good descriptors as to why or what the comments were actually talking about here. Things like comments emphasize the value of diversity in teams, not just in terms of demographics, but also in thought and expertise. Idea of applying proven technologies from one field into another and cross-disciplinary collaboration. So pretty good stuff here, I would say. It also very clearly was able to sort of take my ask for recommendations of future posts and how to tailor future posts and give some good ideas. Things like highlighting stories of innovation, anecdotes from within the company or famous historical examples, engaging more on the topic of diversity, role of diversity in innovation, discussing successful innovations that came from diverse teams or how diverse perspectives contributed to solutions. Things like failure and learning, pretty good. Solve a problem challenges are pretty nice. I do think this 5th one is a little bit redundant. Interactive content on innovation processes. Develop interactive content isn't a very good recommendation, I would say, but these first 4 are pretty decent, and it gave me a little short little conclusion. So overall, GPT-4 Turbo did a pretty decent job. 3.5 Turbo had a little bit less structure to it, but it did have some actually good ideas within this big block of text. Pretty much all that it did is it would sort of emphasize what someone was saying and then directly suggest posts here. So just to read like this middle paragraph, it said several commenters emphasized the importance of a diverse team in driving innovation. This suggests that future posts could focus on the benefits of diversity in terms of bringing different perspectives and ideas to the table. For example, a post could highlight a successful company that has implemented D&I initiatives and have seen positive impacts on their innovation efforts. And it pretty much followed this of giving like an example of what was discussed, an explanation, and then a specific example of sort of how you could tailor posts. It wasn't as specifically structured as GPT-4 Turbo's was, but still had some decent chunks in there. Did give me a good summary at the end and a overall reaction at the top. But still, once again, I would say could use a little bit more fleshing out here. Gemini Pro I took a bit of a interesting approach here. It gave me actually an overall reaction and then highlighted the positives and the negatives, which I thought was a unique take on this. Things like, some commenters highlighted the importance of supportive and empowering leadership and culture and fostering innovation, whereas some of the negatives were disagreed with post assertion that frustration is a primary driver of innovation, arguing that necessity is often more a significant factor. So good takeaways from these positives and negatives. However, the actual insights and recommendations aren't too good. This is giving me more of of organizational things to change, not necessarily social media posts. So it definitely missed the mark on here. I think it was especially funny that one of its recommendations was literally to focus on creating a culture of frustration, encouraging employees to, identify and voice their frustrations. I wouldn't recommend creating a culture of frustration myself, but apparently that's what Gemini Pro thought might be useful. Gemini Ultra was a little bit better. It was able to also give me some really good stuff here at the top, highlighting sort of the overall positive reactions and some of the key discussion points here. Some recommendations for future posts, things like focus on topics that are relevant, share stories and examples of how innovation was successful. But then sort of similar to this first suggestion, we start to see how, it tails off into just giving very general explanations for social media, like posting and whatnot. So this definitely started out strong here with these discussion themes, but then the actual analysis and whatnot started getting more general and not necessarily as useful. One could assume that, if you're doing the social media analysis, you already have sort of the resources behind you to be able to make and know a lot of these things, like examples of how you can incorporate these different recommendations with a question or a visual, things like that. So Gemini Ultra was really disappointing, especially given, it's decent understanding of the other ones, but gave me this sort of very generalized, very unasked for approach to this. Moving on to Mistral-Medium. Mistral-Medium did a okay job of actually sort of putting together an analysis, which we've seen sort of Mistral over the past couple analyses do sort of pretty decent attempts at a lot of these questions. So it got some good things like emphasizing the importance of leadership. Noted that leaders should create an environment where ideas are not stifled, role of creativity and freedom. Other commenters pointed to the importance of having a clear goal. And then also, given this analysis, gave some themes to elicit positive reactions and engagement, highlight successful leaders who have created an environment of support and empower their team to innovate, share maybe those best practices, showcase diverse teams that have successfully innovated and emphasize, creativity and freedom, share examples of successful innovations that were driven by a clear goal or problem to solve, emphasize, efficient processes, power of necessity, highlight examples of things that were driven by necessity and restrictions. So pretty decent takeaway, pretty decent analysis overall. Nothing too super specific, not insanely structured, but had a good flow. Pretty much followed decently the mark that I was looking at. Llama2 was all right. It did thank me for providing the list of comments. And did get that the reaction was generally positive, yada, yada. There are some comments that suggest need for better leadership and more effective. And then to improve the company's social media strategy, some actionable takeaways and insights, and emphasize the importance of leadership, foster a culture of creativity. These also start to get more to the organizational level rather than specific social media sort of analysis kind of things. Where then did these models end up on my personal ranking? Well, I thought that GPT-4 Turbo actually did the best job. Super clear, super well structured, gave me really good sort of ideas, followed the instructions very well. So overall, GPT-4 Turbo definitely gave me sort of the highest quality and the best output that I was looking for. I followed that up with Mistral-Medium. I thought Mistral-Medium also did a really good job of giving sort of an overall analysis that's short, succinct, to the point, gives some good ideas, gives some good highlights, some of the good things that you would want to highlight when looking at the social media stuff. So good job to Mistral-Medium. 3.5 Turbo then came in third, giving sort of, the overall reaction and the summary pretty well. And then also some very specific examples and why its formatting wasn't great since it did just sort of do a block paragraph format and sequentially. But it did give some decent examples, even things like, Google's 20% time policy that allows employees to work on personal projects. It highlighted some really good examples there. So I thought this was a decent takeaway when asked for an analysis. The latter half, I was generally disappointed with. Gemini Ultra, Gemini Pro didn't really get well or good or to the point at all from what I was looking for. Gemini Pro started off really strong with this overall positive and negative, but then the takeaway is to, focus on creating a culture of frustration, not exactly what I was looking for. Gemini Ultra somehow did even worse with having some of the themes up here, but then completely tailing off. And then Llama2 was sort of just, also didn't miss the mark, and gave me more of those organizational things of like, it totally didn't understand the ask. And while it was sort of trying to get to a lot of the good ideas, it also started giving me things like, the company should use its resources more effectively to support innovation. No, that's not exactly what I was looking for. I was looking for post insights, which GPT-4 Turbo and Mistral-Medium and GPT 3.5 Turbo really gave me good results with. The final actual analysis here is then the sentiment analysis that each of these models did. And so I ran each of the comments through for them to generate a sentiment and then see sort of how those sentiments differed based on the model to try and, see which model was mostly in line with what I felt was the correct sentiment. And this is a bit of a breakdown of just the count of how each model was able to sort of do their reasoning. And a few interesting things here. Llama2, 7B, the 7 billion parameter model, only said that one comment was positive and then the rest of them were all neutral. So I'm not really very thrilled by Llama2's performance, but we see a decent spread across the board from the other models with relatively similar counts here of the negative, neutrals, and positives. Mistral was definitely a little bit more heavy on the neutrals, whereas things like Gemini Pro actually was more heavy on the positives. And then things like GPT-4 Turbo, Gemini Ultra were a decent split with some of the negatives here coming to light. Looking at sort of the individual outputs then actually on each of these comments and how each of the models determined the sentiment, it seems like there was a decent sort of consensus generally among how each of these comments were being scored. I mean, Llama2 did say that everything was neutral, so I would take this column G with a bit of a grain of salt. But it seems that more often than not, when there was one or two outliers, but then things sort of converge to the right sort of sentiment, I would say. Things like a diverse team means nothing. Getting the lowest sentiment, I would say, is correct. Whereas like this comment up here that reads, I always find that the most innovative teams are the ones who are all swimming in the same direction, all crystal clear on what they're working to achieve together, blah, 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 blah. Using exclamation marks with a smiley face was pretty much across the board said very positive. And one of the funny things that I started realizing is that maybe the idea of finding the best model for sentiment analysis is actually not the correct way of approaching this problem. Since like a sentiment is not necessarily a very binary thing, and it's pretty subjective is the word I was looking for there. It's pretty subjective. It might actually be more useful to use more than one model to create sort of an aggregate final sentiment score. So that was sort of a fun learning path that I discovered there, is that instead of actually taking one of these at a face value, it would be more useful to sort of take a couple readings from a few different models, similar to like getting some opinions from a group of people or a team, and then compiling that into a final composite score. Which for this one, I kept it very simple. One positive was +1, neutral was +0, and then negative, and then what is it? Yeah, negative was -1. So adding all those up in a sum gave me what I felt the best actual score at the end of the day from all of these models. Is it realistic to run sentiment through 6 models all at once in parallel to generate just one sentiment score? At scale, likely not, but for this experiment, I thought it gave me a more robust output than actually just trying to determine which one was mostly in line. So because, yeah, I mean, there could be some tweaking, especially with exact sentiments that you're looking for. However, you can see that a lot of the times there are still some, outliers here that could affect it. And also sentiment isn't necessarily just positive, negative, or neutral. There can be some leaning positive, some leaning negative, and running this through multiple times and then getting that final score actually was able to give me that better result when looking at the sentiments and comparing the sentiments between the comments. So in conclusion of what model's the best for this, I would say there probably is none. I would definitely not use Llama2 for my specific use case here, as it didn't quite pick up exactly on what I was looking for. But as you can see from the other ones, they were generally in line with each other, but a little bit of an adversarial approach here, or taking a composite and an average, is likely the best. So inconclusive on what model is the best for sentiment scoring, but that was a fun thing to see here. So to sort of conclude on all of this and what it might mean, and sort of the big question probably that you're wondering is, what is the best model? I would say probably very disappointingly to you that there is no one good model. And this is something that I've been seeing sort of pop up, especially with sort of the development of these models, is that it's actually probably more useful to use a mixture of them for specific use cases, depending on what you're looking for. And the models themselves even take advantage of this already. Things like GPT-4 Turbo is rumored to be 8 actual individual models of about 122 billion parameters each. Don't take my word for that, just saw that online. That are actually very fine-tuned towards specific tasks and then combined together into this one big model for GPT-4 Turbo. And we've seen this pop up for things like Mistral, where they have Mixtral, the mixture of experts, 8x7, which is 7 billion parameter models, that actually approaches this in a similar sort of fashion to what GPT-4 Turbo and likely what 3.5 Turbo and Ultra are doing, and then probably also a little bit of what Pro is doing. So behind the scenes, these models aren't even, relying on one sort of single source of truth, and I would say that we shouldn't either. We saw here that for like the discussion themes, GPT-4 Turbo really performed very well, but for commonality, I liked mostly what Mistral was doing, or in GPT-4 Turbo ranked a little bit more middle of the pack. But then for the overall analysis, 4 Turbo was back up there. So, I really liked and used 4 Turbo for my first sort of outputs here, but then I started to see things like Mistral might give me a better commonality analysis. And so using things like LangChain and being able to plug and play different models once you have access to their actual programming interface keys can give you sort of more robust outputs depending on what you're looking for. So I don't think that there's necessarily one better model per se. There are certainly ones that perform better across the board. I would say like 4 Turbo is doing really well, whereas Llama2 falls short a lot of the times. But also what we're seeing too is just the law of scale come into play here. GPT-4 Turbo is a much bigger, much more tuned model than Llama2. So, at the end of the day, it's really, I think a good use of a mixture of models depending on the use case and what their best sort of performance or what your specific output of what you're looking for is sort of a good way to go down that. But this was a fun sort of experiment to see what the other models would give me if plugged into PulseRead, and then going over the actual outputs that they gave me. Some of the limitations here that I would like to note is obviously these 6 models are not all inclusive of all of the current ones. I would love to do some testing with things like Llama2 70 billion, things like Mistral 8x7b, things like Gemini 1.5, which just came out a little bit ago here. So, there's always continued testing, always continued experimentation that needs to be done. But super interesting to see how these models are actually differing in sort of this, one shot, 0 shot situation, where they're just following all the same prompt and then comparing the output. So I hope this was of some interest for those who made it to the end here and provided a little bit of insight into the different models and how they might be compared to with the specific application of social media comment analysis that I've been working on. And thank you all for watching.